Hi, everyone. We are streaming live on YouTube and recording on eScribe.
All right, thank you. We've got a couple more minutes, so we'll start right at 3:20. All right, it's 3:20, so I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting of the Housing Redevelopment and Community Programs Committee to order. And I think there's still, by all the dinging, there's still people signing into this meeting. So let's start with roll call.
Anderson? Absent. Becerra?
Present.
Carlino?
Present.
Contos?
Here.
Hess?
Present.
Jones? I thought I saw, oh, no, absent. Jordan? Absent. Nugent?
Present.
Savage? Absent. Cheryl?
Present.
Masika?
Present.
West?
I'm present, and I think we were just a little bit too quick because Anderson and Jones are also here.
Present.
No.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So I guess our first item, as always, is the approval of the minutes. These are from July 13th, 2022, and without any objection, those will be approved. And then our next item is public comment on non-agenda items. And let's see if there's folks that would like to give comment on non-agenda items. Now is the time, and we do have people in attendance, so I'll give you guys a chance to raise your hands if you want to comment. And I'm not seeing any hands go up, so we'll go ahead and move on to our first item of business. We have some really big items on the agenda today. So our first item is an update on the Sleepy Inn property, and Annette is here from the MRA to present on that item.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Annette Marchessault. I am a project manager slash redevelopment specialist with the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. The purpose of today's presentation is simply an informational presentation. We're not asking the committee to take any action. It's just a look back and a look forward with regard to the Sleepy Inn project, or the Sleepy Inn site. So I'd like to ask Dale Bickle to just make a few introductory comments. And I do have a presentation put together. Should I go ahead and show my screen or share my screen with regard to that?
That would be great.
Okay.
Thank you, Annette.
Sure.
And Dale?
Okay, I hope that's sharing.
We can see it, although I think we can see a border.
I'm sharing it out of a PDF, so it does have a border around it.
Okay, that's fine. Just making sure that that's what you intended.
Great. Okay.
Awesome. All right, Dale, you want to introduce this item?
Sure, thanks. Dale Bickle, the city's chief administrative officer. Wanted to talk with you a little bit about the past history of the Sleepy Inn and how the performance was during the pandemic, and also the plans for redevelopment as we are emerging from the pandemic. We are ready to move on here. And so, as you recall, and by the way, so we have members of MRA here, including Annette, who's going to be the project manager on this project. We're also hopefully Adrienne Beck will be joining us from Missoula County, though she had another conflict, and so she may or may not be able to pop in to help answer questions on the non-congregate shelter. So I'll cover that part as the B team here, and then we'll turn it over to Annette and MRA folks to talk about the redevelopment plans. So as you recall, the city purchased the Sleepy Inn in 2020, identifying a need for a non-congregate shelter. And during the pandemic, we had started out using hotel rooms, but for obvious reasons, it was very difficult to find a good and ended up being much longer than we expected terms for non-congregate shelter. So we made the decision to purchase the Sleepy Inn with some controversy for $1.1 million at the location of Russell and Broadway at 1427 West Broadway. Thanks, Annette. Can you advance this slide?
Uh-huh.
So during that time, we were able to use the Sleepy Inn for 395 people during the pandemic with an average stay of 7 days, and with a number of different types of people, homeless individuals, people traveling through Missoula that ended up being diagnosed or being a close contact, just people needed a place to go to avoid infecting their families, and people who were still COVID positive, and were discharged from hospitals, but didn't have another safe place to go. So we were able to house quite a few people there. And we incurred 1.89 million or 1.9 million, almost $2 million in operating costs. But because it was heavily pandemic supported through FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the only cost to the city was $24,000. And in fact, in that $1.8 million, the city received $718,000 in rent that was placed in our property management fund that helped support a lot of our other properties as well, such as the Bridge Apartments, the emergency winter shelter, and those types of things. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the MRA staff, and MRA is going to talk about the West Broadway master plan, how this piece fits into it, and our approach to redevelopment.
Great. Thank you, Dale. So as Dale mentioned, there was some controversy as the Sleepy Inn was purchased in 2020, in April of 2020. And MRA funds were used to purchase that property. So MRA, in collaboration with the Downtown Association, undertook a master plan for the area that includes the Sleepy Inn site. And we presented this master plan at the end of last year, at the end of 2021. So hopefully many members of the council are familiar with the master plan, although I know that there are new council members. This master plan was undertaken with a really extensive public outreach process. Unfortunately, it was undertaken at the time that the pandemic was still really robust. And so there was a lot of virtual engagement, but we also had an opportunity for a number of in-person meetings, either meeting outside or in locations where we had enough room for social distancing. The master plan, it was undertaken by or led by our planning consultants, Dover Cole and Partners, who did the downtown master plan. This was an extension of that. Funding was provided through TIF, and then we also got a grant from the Big Sky Trust Fund. As I said, we went through a really robust public engagement process, slowed up the process just a little bit so that we could engage crew and the north side, west side residents, and think that it was a very successful process when we were complete. It becomes and did become, as an adopted document, an amendment to the downtown master plan and the city's growth policy. It also assumed that the Sleepy Inn would be one of the very first sites to be developed, and that is playing out. The master plan with regard to the Sleepy Inn site, the goals were to create some sort of a gateway experience at the corner of West Broadway and Russell, have some signature architecture, really focus on pedestrian-friendly experience on West Broadway, distinct identity with regard to the neighborhood, and use this as a template that will catalyze development in the greater master plan area. As I mentioned previously, it was prepared by the master planning consultants for downtown master plan, Dover Cole Partners. Then we asked them, assuming that the Sleepy Inn would be one of the first sites developed, to take a little deeper dive on that site, which they did, looking at the architecture, certainly like a massing of architecture. So looking at a building that's 4 to 5 stories, mixed use, approximately 32 residential units, 5,000 square feet of commercial space. And they also demonstrated the potential to meet all of the parking demand on site. This site will be required to go through design excellence. So this was a deep dive. We have no idea whether the market will support this vision, but that's the next step that we're looking into. So the redevelopment strategy is to engage a realtor, and the city is working with a realtor to solicit development proposals using the master plan as a guiding document. Those development proposals will be required to go through or to have include their what they propose as a public engagement process to continue to engage the neighborhood. Once preferred development proposal has been identified, then we would bring it back to City Council and work with City Council to establish the reasonable procedure for sale of the property and approve the purchase and sale agreement for the property. If TIF assistance is requested by the developer, MRA would consider that request And then also want to make you aware that all of the proceeds of the sale would go to the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Tentative schedule, we will, so following this presentation, so sometime within the next few weeks, really engage a realtor and get the market on the property, solicit development proposals. Not surprisingly, now that the building is vacant, it has been broken into a few times. And we expect that there could be a request to remove the building sooner than later. It may, being broken into and a lot of nefarious activities could become a liability rather than an asset with regard to sale. So we expect that MRA may consider removing the building sooner than later. We hope to have a development proposal, a successful development proposal by the end of this year or early into next year. And that's what we would bring back to the council. And then next spring, if there is TIF assistance requested, MRA would consider that as well. I think with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to the committee for questions.
All right, thank you. So Daniel, go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. Yeah, back whenever the city was first talking about this after it was purchased, it seemed like the plan was to turn it into a permanently affordable housing for part of it. I mean, along with the commercial and everything else. And I just want to make sure that that's still the plan. Are we trying to ensure that we work with the developer that's going to have permanently affordable housing here?
That is, so permanently affordable housing on the Sleepy Inn site is not a guarantee. When we did the master plan, we looked at so beyond just the Sleepy Inn site, and the master plan contains, so recommended targets for affordable housing, but spread throughout the site. So not specifically in just one area. And so we certainly would love to have some affordable units in this development. We don't know that the market will support that. And it's not necessarily a guarantee that this entire Sleepy Inn development will be affordable housing.
Could I have a follow-up, please?
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah,
I couldn't hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, I've got a news article here where our CPDI team was saying it was an ideal site for low-income housing in the future, since it's a major public transit route and close to schools and hospitals. And also another news article where Mayor Angen was saying it would be a good piece of land for redevelopment for truly affordable housing, most likely low-income housing. And they were talking specifically about the Sleepy Inn site, not necessarily the whole Broadway master plan. And I guess I'm just trying to ask for the public why the city's stance kind of changed on this, because it seemed like before we were going to definitely have permanently affordable housing there, or at least that was the intention. And then now it sounds more like the intention might be to sell it and most likely not have permanently affordable housing. So I'm just curious what changed the city's plan. And I guess Dale has his hand up. Thanks.
And Dale, can I could let Dale speak to that, and then I can fill in if necessary.
Sounds good.
Thanks. So this is going to be a rather difficult site to develop. I mean, there is not good access, and it's not big. And that's one of the reasons we're not doing in a bigger project like Riverfront Triangle, where we would do a big request for proposals. We're actually going to use a realtor to help front this because it's a pretty small and challenging site. The question is whether the economics work to create an income restricted site or not. And that's where MRA could come in. where that if a developer comes in with a proposal, and so what we're trying to do here is that we're not going to maximize the amount of sale proceeds here. We want to maximize the amount of maximize the implementation of the West Broadway master plan. And so, but a combination of things that we could help try to attract a developer that would do a permanent affordable component are things like MRA and additional MRA investment, or a reduction in the sales value of the site itself. And so those are the things that we will have to work with. But if we don't get a developer who is interested in those things, the city really isn't in the business of building housing. It's the private sector's role. And if we can support that, we can. But if somebody comes in and doesn't have a component like that, that's where it'll be difficult.
Annette, do you have something to add to that?
I would just add that the master plan was undertaken after the initial purchase of the Sleepy Inn. And so we feel that adds, and it adds to that sort of dimension of how we were looking at the site. So when it was initially purchased, I think there, was some observation that affordable housing certainly would be a strong consideration. As we undertook the master plan, that became a more holistic look, not just site specific, but at a larger area. And so I would just add that is a layered amount of information beyond when the site was initially purchased.
Hey, Annette, can I get you to take your screen down so that we can see each other?
I'm trying to do that, and bear with me for a second. I've lost my controls, and so there we go. Where are my meeting controls? Where are my meeting controls?
I can't do any of this, so. Let's see. So now we can still see your background. You're still, I wonder.
Cursor at the bottom of your screen, and that bottom bar will pop up and you can unshare your screen.
At the bottom of my screen. I am so sorry about this.
That's okay. I'll go ahead and let John ask his question while you're figuring this out.
Sure. Actually, a couple of questions. One, I was just curious if anybody knows why we paid $1.1 million for that when it was estimated at $700,000 or $800,000.
Dale or Ellen, could you answer that? Oh, let me see if I can.
During the time of the original acquisition, the city didn't get a formal appraisal done, but we did get an opinion of value that was from an appraiser, well, not a formal appraisal, and it did support the $1.1 million price tag at that time.
Thank you. John, did you have another question?
Yeah, I did. It sounded like he said MRA money might be used to demo because there's people breaking into it. And then it sounded like you were going to use MRA money to do something else, rebuild or do something. It just sounded a little confusing to me. Could you be a little bit more specific on MRA money involved in this thing? CHIP money?
Could I respond to that?
Yes.
I think we will, in all likelihood, see some TIF funding used to take those buildings down, or that building down. We're past the point, I believe, where it's an asset and it has become and is becoming more of a liability. We have some asbestos abatement that has to be done in there, which we've known about since we purchased it, because we had a phase 1 ESA done before we purchased it. So right now we're trying to get an asbestos contractor in there to do a building materials inventory and determine what the cost of that will be. And that will probably be funded with brownfields money. But then the actual deconstruction, if we can do that, or demolition of the building, may well be done with TIF funding. And we need to do that as soon as possible. It's an increasing liability. We've had to kick people out of there 2 or 3 times already, and you can imagine the shape that leaves it in. Because none of the plumbing, none of the facilities are working in there. Everything's been shut off.
That's good. Thanks.
I'm muted. Jordan, do you have a question or yeah?
Sure. Yeah, I guess the Affordable Housing Trust Fund tool was not available when we purchased the Sleepy Inn. That's correct. That we established that after we purchased the Sleepy Inn. Can someone confirm that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I guess I sort of feel like there's some trade-offs here where if we sell the property and turn a profit on it, that gets reinvested into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we may be able to leverage that money from that Affordable Housing Trust Fund to a greater extent somewhere else within the master plan. Is that fair? Okay, Dale's nodding. So I guess I want to be clear that developing permanently affordable housing is extremely important to me, but I'm really comfortable with sort of that potential trade-off of if we're able to sell this property for a different use, and then as a function of that, develop more permanently affordable housing on a nearby site that is at a lower cost per unit to develop because it doesn't exhibit those site constraints. I feel like that's still a win in my book. So I hope that we will continue to be apprised of that. I think it's one of the real highlights of that Affordable Housing Trust Fund that we created the ordinance that when city property is sold, the proceeds have to go into that fund. And then I just have another follow-up comment, I guess, if I may.
Sure.
And that's that I think for all the noise about the Sleepy Inn over the years, I think this is truly a success story of, we paid an amount of money that our valuation opinion determined was reasonable. We bought it in very short order, kind of under duress almost, to meet a really acute public safety need in our community. And I remember Jesse Yeager from the Poverello Center, to paraphrase him in the meeting some months, months or maybe last summer ago. He said that the Sleepy Inn absolutely, without a doubt, saved lives. And I think that's really important to note that the Sleepy Inn prevented people in our community from dying during the pandemic. And we can't understate the importance of that and the value of that. And now on the back end, we made money through FEMA, and we're going to make money on the sale of this property, and we're going to develop housing in the process. So that to me is win-win-win, and really speaks to the visionary nature of our Adrian Beck and our emergency management team, and the mayor and the county commissioners and everyone who is involved in tipping up that non-congregate shelter, and now of course reaping the community rewards of being able to land bank that site and control its redevelopment.
Stacy.
Damn it, I was afraid I was going to go after Jordan, and I just make a habit of not doing that. Everything that Jordan said, basically ditto. And I think that, it's really important points that he made. And my question, what is really to Mr. Bickle, and, just to really kind of cut and dry the numbers, $1.1 million is what we paid for it, with, a professional saying that that evaluation, there was lots of noise about it, but a professional said that that was in line for an appropriate amount of money to purchase that. Then the numbers that you showed in your first slides showed that we made $1.8 million from FEMA in terms of the expense or the money reimbursed to us for running and operating the non-congregate shelter. So we've more than made more money on that. I just want to make sure that, I think that those are really important numbers to highlight. And now you're reckoning.
So, $1.8 million was the total operating costs of running that non-congregate shelter during the pandemic. In that slide, there was another piece of that. There was over $700,000 of that $1.8 million was actually rent that FEMA paid for the operation of that. So the one way you can think of it is that we paid $1.1 million, but we received $700,000+ in rent that essentially offsets that purchase price.
And thank you so much. That's exactly what I was trying to distill from that first slide, because I think that's an important point to make. And then we will, so you could try to break it down to dollars and cents. We paid $1.1 million. We received $700,000 back. And now we are going to sell that for, what would be a reasonable to expect way more than $400,000, which would then basically put us back, to that $1.1 million that we originally paid. The other question I have is in regards to the affordable housing component, because, I think when we were trying to figure out what the long-term uses of this position or this property was post the pandemic, sorry, dog's barking, was, the possibility of affordable housing. But really what the market is showing, especially with the cost of building right now at being higher than we could have anticipated, that we need bigger sites to make it really pencil out, such as, Casa Loma with 207 units, Bellagio, Trinity, which are well over hundreds of units. There's an economy of scale here, and it doesn't make sense to develop this smaller property given the amount of, cost. We wouldn't be able to make a real impact in permanently affordable housing if we try to develop the site ourselves versus taking the sale of this money and applying it to projects that have more of an economy of scale. Is that a fair assessment of kind of the picture we're in right now?
Yeah, we just so happens coincidentally that we have a bunch of our housing folks on here, but there is that with the traditional affordable housing tools we have today, like LIHTC and some of the CDBG grants, those are really, in order to make them pencil for a developer, they have to get a bigger economy of scale. In order for us to do a permanently affordable housing on a site like this, which is less than 40 units, it's very likely to be possible, but it's going to take additional. It would take additional investment, additional subsidy, and but for the right project, that might be great, and we would consider that.
I keep forgetting to unmute myself. All right, I'll move on to the next person for questions, and then I'll try and we'll move on to public comment. None of our items today are have any sort of vote. They're just informational. Let's see, the next person that has their hands up is Sandra. So you have the floor.
Thank you. I have a few questions. Where did the original funds come from when we purchased this?
MRA.
Purchased it with MRA funds.
Okay.
Funding.
Okay, and then so just to for yin and yang, has there been any talk about reimbursing MRA with however much we originally paid for, and then any other proceeds from the sale, if there is any left over, put that in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund?
No, the proceeds from this sale would go into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It would not come back to MRA. And in a sense, that would be MRA's contribution to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Okay.
And when we were first discussing this a couple of years ago, it was mentioned that the city has had their eye on this property for a long time. Is that true? And if so, what was the original intent for this property before COVID hit?
All right, Dale, could you respond to that? Or Ellen?
Yeah, I'm happy to respond to that. I think we've seen it, both the housing folks and the MRA have seen this as a wonderful redevelopment opportunity, particularly with the investment that we're making in Russell Street with the rebuild of the bridge and the street. And it was highlighted in certainly the second downtown master plan as one of the gateways into downtown, and the Sleepy Inn, quite frankly, hasn't been a very significant gateway feature, if you will. So I mean, it's just been that use in that location in the 50s and 60s probably made a lot more sense than it does today, now that we have Interstate 90 and highway. Broadway is not the major east-west corridor through the Northwest.
Okay, and one more, if I may, Heidi. So Dale mentioned that our goal is not with the sale, our goal is not to maximize profits with the sale, but to maximize the implementation of the master plan. I disagree with that. I think that we should try to maximize profits with the sale. But that being said, how will we ensure implementation of the master plan if we do sell this to a private buyer when we do have their private property rights? So how will we ensure that they will comply with the master plan?
I think we have a good model for that in the way we've handled the Scott Street property with Rivara, where we entered into a letter of intent. The city council approved a letter of intent with them, which laid out what were the city's goals and how the development of that property would meet the city's goals. And I believe that we're looking at a similar process here. I think if we just wanted to sell it for the highest value, we would simply just put it on the market for the highest value. We're not doing that. We're going through a process of vetting developers through our realtor who share the same values that the city has set out and the city council has adopted in their strategic plan, and that you've adopted in the West Broadway master plan and the downtown master plan.
Okay, that was a really good explanation and a good example. Thank you. I'm all finished.
And then Stacy, did I cut you off early because your hand is still up? Did you have another question?
Oh, nope, sorry, just didn't.
Okay, just making sure. So then we'll move on to the next person in line, which is Kristen Jordan. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. So Ellen, I heard you mention deconstruction, and I'm really curious if what are the like the parameters for requiring a deconstruction rather than just a demolition, and is there any way to make sure that this project is deconstructed as much as possible?
The only tool that we have for that is if they want to use TIF funding to take the building down.
Okay. So
if you want to use TIF funding to take your building down, you have to either deconstruct or you have to demonstrate through a professional deconstruction contractor's analysis that there's nothing there worth salvaging.
Great. That's awesome.
So you pay for it yourself.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. I have another question too, and it's about design excellence and the overlay that, so this building is going to be required to have the design excellence overlay. And I have a two-part question. I kind of wonder if design excellence doesn't preclude affordable housing. And my other question is there any affordable housing within the design excellence overlay?
I don't know that we have any affordable housing projects that have gone into one of those corridors since the design excellence overlay was adopted by the council. One of the things that MRA does is whether it's an affordable housing project or an office building, if you want to use TIF funding, you have to meet the intent of design excellence. I don't care if you're located on one of the corridors or 6 blocks from one of the corridors. So that's the kind of carrot that MRA can bring to the table. Other than that, the city regulatory process is confined to those corridors. But I think, yes, you can have an affordable housing project that meets those parameters. Absolutely.
Hey, I had a quick follow-up question on Kristen's, and I'm not sure if maybe Jordan knows the answer to this, but it was my understanding that design excellence applied to commercial and mixed use buildings, but if it was a straight up residential building, then it did not have to go through the design excellence process. Is that correct?
Multifamily has to.
Multifamily does. Okay, that's the difference. But if you built
single family is exempt.
if you built 10 like townhouses, they would be exempt. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just to double check though, like we don't know if there are any examples of affordable housing that fall within the design excellence requirements.
Annette, you've been sitting in on those reviews. Can you think of anything?
I'm not aware of any.
I don't know that we're aware of any that looked at it and then didn't proceed either. So that's
Correct. That
Sorry, you kind of faded out. Dale, can you say that again, please?
well, I'm not aware of any affordable housing projects that have gone through design excellence. I don't know. I'm not aware of any affordable housing projects that looked at design excellence and then did not proceed either.
I think one consideration there is that the design excellence standards apply on the major corridors through the city, and those are usually more expensive properties because of things like traffic counts and the attractiveness of commercial development. So affordable housing projects would probably tend to not be on those corridors. But I think Solstice and Equinox, which are on the corridor, which would have been subjected to design excellence had it been in place at the time, probably meet it in spades.
Yeah, it's ideal to put affordable housing on these corridors because of the access to transportation and
Sure.
Other services.
Right.
Thank you.
It's just the economics.
All right, so Amber.
Yeah, thanks. I think a lot of my points have already been made, but you know, we bought this in 2020, and if we think about what the real estate market has done since then, I'm going to be interested. I know we didn't get a full appraisal when we did that, but we had, you know, some very experienced people giving us opinions about that, about the price, but we had to move fast, and I'm thrilled that we did that. And as we are looking at the numbers that Dale had up, this was a great investment for us, and a great way to land bank. But I'm curious if we will, and maybe I missed this, have we done an appraisal on the site? And will we do that? And I understand we're not looking to sell it necessarily at the absolute highest rate, but you know, I don't want the fact that there's going to be, there will likely be quite a bit of money that we can invest in the housing trust fund if we decide not to do affordable housing here because it doesn't make sense with the economies of scale and it's not the right place. Could someone speak to where we are, if I missed that, on doing an appraisal, when we'll see an appraisal done on it? And I realize we're kind of early in this process.
Ellen, do you want me to talk about that, or?
Yeah, that's fine. We can flip a coin.
We haven't commissioned an appraisal as of yet. There are a couple reasons. You know, one, typically an appraisal is done to corroborate a value that's agreed upon between two willing parties. But what we might do, so there's that one issue, and whether, but we also have to figure out in consultation with our realty team on what we want to sell it for. We might actually get a value related to that, on helping us try to assign a listing value of it. And that's where we go. We also need to determine what we're actually going to list. And so some of the deconstruction things we've talked about are going to inform that as well. So that that's still a little bit of a moving target.
Yeah, and I think one of the beauties of this being in an urban renewal district is that, you know, state law is very clear that you can discount sale of property in order to achieve the goals of the district or the goals of the community. And I think, you know, as we look at value and as we look at what we want to see happen there may be some trade-offs, and we have the flexibility to do that.
All right, so
Heidi, can I make a quick comment?
Oh, very quick. And then we have one more question from Mirta, and then we also have a hand up. And I feel like I'm not being great at time management because our other agenda item is also going to encourage a lot of discussion.
I'll be super fast and it won't end with a question. I just want to say that, you know, this is a vote that I did very early on council, and I did my research. We were solving an acute problem that we had in our community and a public health problem. And it was, I'm thrilled that this is coming back around and we're going to have so many good options, because it was just a great example of being forward thinking for a community. And we did that, and I'm proud of it. And I'm thrilled that we did this, and this is where we are, regardless of exactly how we move the money around and how we use the money to find affordable housing.
All right, Mirta, and then we'll go to public comment.
Thanks. I'll be brief. I just wanted to, I want to, a few reminders, if you will. But first and foremost, I'm super excited to about the future of the Sleepy Inn. I think this will serve as a catalyst for development in that neighborhood, and it's going to set the tone in a way for that area. So what we talked about, the affordable housing component of this potential development, that's not all that was discussed, or that's not all that came out of all the public process that took place. I know that, you know, the neighbors really wanted to see uses that are compatible with goals that are in the plan, uses that are gonna be of benefit to the neighborhood. So I think in a time where getting public to be engaged in a process like this, we're really lucky to be in a neighborhood where neighbors are wanting and willing to continue to be engaged. And so I know that this is already in your plans, but I would like to really stress this point that collaboration and checking in with the neighborhood is super important. And I would like to see that stipulated in any buy-sell agreement, so that any development that takes place here goes through a really robust public engagement with the neighborhood to check in and make sure that the uses are, you know, compatible and will benefit the immediate neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mirta. Okay, we'll go to public comment, and the first person on our list is Brittany Palmer, and I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You can't see me though, right?
Nope, we can just hear you. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, I'll just go for it. I just wanted to say, or just note, I guess, that on page 67 of the plan, under the affordable housing targets header, it says that there should be 18 to 25 units of affordable units for households earning up to 30% AMI, 10 to 25 units for households earning 30 to 80% AMI, and then 14 to 20 units earning between 80 and 120% AMI in the whole plan area. And that totals 50 to 70 affordable housing units on the whole site. And it also says that, quote, just increasing supply is not enough to ensure housing attainability for all residents. And quote, city-owned properties should be leveraged to provide as much of this affordable housing as possible, given the greater control of the development outcome. And I totally understand there's like higher construction costs and a lot of constraints for potential developers related to economy of scale, but given that the city doesn't yet have possession or control over a lot of the other parcels in the planning area, is there a plan for ensuring that we meet these targets in other areas of the broader site if there's truly going to be 0 affordable units developed at the Sleepy Inn site? So that's kind of my first question. And then I'm also, I guess, just wondering if there's any ability or plan to incentivize a potential developer to create even a couple of units in this development, because and then also I wanted to note that the plan also states that limiting short-term rentals in the plan area is a strategy for new developments on city-owned land. So is there any plan for that to be in the development agreement, particularly if none are going to be affordable? And also just want to say, like, obviously more money in the trust fund is great, but it would be, you know, also great to get a few of these units to be affordable, even if it's just a small amount, since the city does have control over this one. And I also want to just thank Councilperson Becerra for asking that neighbors continue to be included. And I'll say, like, this is a really relatively tall building, which I'm personally into, but I know in a lot of our organizing work, and I work for North Missoula Community Development Corporation. And a lot of our like community organizing work, just talking to neighbors, we found that folks are typically more supportive of higher density if some of the units are affordable. So that might be another reason to consider just doing. I just hope that you guys do whatever you can to, within the constraints of everything else, try to get a developer that might do even just a few affordable units. Thanks.
Thank you, Brittany. So the next person is Julie Lacey. I think you should be able to unmute now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm Julie Lacey, the Director of Economic Development for Missoula Economic Partnership, and I just want to provide a really brief comment. From MEP's perspective, what the city and the MRA are proposing here, we believe to be a good approach to the redevelopment of the property. As we worked with the city to align partners in the Scott Street project on the past, we see this as a way to continue those efforts and really build a model for public-private partnerships that can also fund the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And just want to say that to the extent necessary, MEP is happy to share plans and the city's intent for the property to potential developers. I was a stakeholder or a committee member on the development of the Broadway master plan, and would really see it as an opportunity for the community in that gateway development. So that's all I'll say.
Thank you, Julie. And then the next person is Diane Stensland Bickers.
Hello.
Hello.
I'd just like to say that I'm really grateful that the city has put this much effort into this plan. And I'm really grateful that Jordan hit all the high points that I was going to make, and I don't have to make them. And I'm really sorry that Stacy, you had to follow Jordan again.
Thank you, Diane. And then I believe Bob Oakes also has his hand up, and I believe he's the last person that currently has their hands raised. And you should be allowed to talk now.
Hi, thanks. So I have a lot of thoughts that maybe I should put in writing to council, but just because I know you're short on time. But I'll make just a couple of points. And I also work for the NMCDC, and I'm following up after Brittany. But I'd urge you all to take a look at the online journal Next City and see how the Sleepy Inn was reported then. A lot of quotes from Aaron Pahan. And really kind of very self-congratulatory about how taking on buying that site was helping with the COVID problem, but also thinking ahead and doing land banking for affordable housing. And if you take a look back at the city council discussions of that time, you'll also see that that was very much the goal of city council is to do land banking for affordable housing. And since then, of course, we've had the master plan. And in that master plan is also suggestion of creating a policy whereby MRA could leverage affordability throughout that district through as part of its contributions. And I think that the contributions that are going to ultimately to this project from MRA, you could consider doing more than just a couple of units, but what if it's a 32 residential units in that proposed development, why couldn't 20% of them be guaranteed affordable? What we had wanted to see in that district, I believe, is a mixed income district, not just upscale, but also including people of all incomes, as Brittany mentioned. And one thing that I found a bit concerning was the talk about economies of scale and comparing the economies of scale that are needed to address our affordable housing situation to Villaggio. And I don't think that that's the kind of economies of scale that really are necessary or even desirable. I think we want affordable housing mixed throughout all neighborhoods and not only consolidated in great quantities like that. But other than that, I think it's a great opportunity to look how to develop some more affordability, including in the project that's proposed for that cornerstone. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Bob. I do briefly want to comment that I think that this process leaves all the options on the table. I really appreciate everyone commenting. I'm actually really glad we had as many folks as we did show up and comment on this issue, which has meant that I've had to like click and mute and unmute people, which is nerve-wracking. But I think that both the purchase price and what happens here are open for debate and negotiation, since the goal is to find someone who will realize as many bits and pieces of the West Broadway master plan as possible, which of course includes affordable housing. Hopefully somebody will step up and fill that role and be a partner in this project. So we have a couple more comments from council folks, and then we really do need to move on to the next item. Mike, do you have a quick comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I appreciate everybody's comments, and this is a great discussion. I would just state that just because we put something for sale doesn't mean that we need to take an offer. We're under no obligation to do that. And I think it's a great opportunity to kind of put it out there to potential private partners who might have the equity to do something and see what they come up with. And hopefully they come up with creative ideas. But, you know, if there's one we don't like, then we can go back to the drawing board. So I think that we should just pump the brakes on being concerned about losing an opportunity, because I don't think we're there yet.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Gwen, very quickly, and then Dale, how about you wrap this item up and then we'll move on to vacation rentals.
Just to piggyback on what Mike was saying is I think we're in a great position, actually, and I don't want to get caught in conflicting views on what we need to or not do right now. I think we're in a great position. Back when we bought this, we were acting quickly. This was at the request of the health board, and frankly, it's been a great example of a win in terms of the purpose it served during the pandemic, and then also just we did really well to have bought real estate at that time, and it was a fair price. I spoke to several realtors outside of the discussion on the council floor just to make sure, and they were like, yeah, that's totally a reasonable price given the Russell Street Bridge and this commercial corridor. But I just also want to point out that, as Jordan said, not only did we not have an affordable housing trust fund back when we bought this, we did not have the master plan for the Broadway corridor either. So I think it's very strategic to scope out, kind of take a bigger picture look at all of this and figure out how we're going to get the most bang for the buck out of this. And that is just such a great position to be in. So I'm happy to see this going forward, and the Scott Street Rivera project, you know, that's going to be a great project. We have that tool in front of us. So I'm excited.
All right, Dale, last comment on this item.
Thanks. I just wanted to remind council that that this is just a small piece of the part of the parcels that we can redevelop for the West Broadway master plan, and that the city controls almost an entire city block of land where Missoula Water is, and two adjacent properties. And if we are able to implement the public works needs assessment the way we envision, and being able to consolidate at Scott Street, there is a huge opportunity for redevelopment at the current Missoula Water site, and lots of opportunities for affordable housing there.
Thank you. And I want to just thank staff for doing a really great job throughout the West Broadway master plan process and involving the neighborhood and the neighbors. And I'm really excited to see how this moves forward. That being said, we better move on to our next item, which is the short-term rental data analysis. And I'm hoping we'll at least cover most of it today. And maybe if there's a lot of discussion around this, we'll just have to bring this item back to a future committee, because it really, I think, deserves a lot of attention as well. So I'll turn it over to Emily Harris-Shears to introduce this item.
Thanks. Ricky is going to get us started.
Perfect. All right, Ricky.
Thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Emily. So I wanted to just share a little bit of background on the presentation today and walk you through what we're going to be talking about. And we'll try and move as quickly as we can so that we can preserve as much time for questions. But like Heidi said, we are happy to come back and answer questions at a future date if we need to. So we've been able to compile.
May I interrupt? Excuse me. I'm not able to share the screen. It says it's disabled by the host.
You should be
Oh,
good
there I
now.
am. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Rhea.
All right. While Emily is getting that up, no, that's okay. So we've been able to compile a lot of great data and information through our work with Granicus over the past several months. And today we're going to be going over some of that data with you to help guide the conversation around short-term rentals in our community and provide some good information. You can dig into the data further in the full Granicus report that's been provided here and attached here to the committee meeting, and we'll go through some of the highlights. So I'm going to start by sharing an overview of our current short-term rental ordinance, covering the methods used to compile this report, and I'll share the top-line trends in the data and share what we still don't know about these rentals and the impacts that they have in our community. Emily's then going to dig into the data a little bit more and share about unit characteristics, usage and income estimates, and provide a rundown of market comparisons from other regional jurisdictions. And then Montana's going to close us out with some possible next steps and recommendations for you to consider. I also wanted to mention, as we've got a lot of ground to cover today, we'd appreciate it if questions could be held to the end. And we have additional city staff here on the meeting that are also available to answer additional questions. We have Ben Brewer from the Long Range Planning Team, who can answer questions about the original ordinance and the code reform, any code reform questions. Charmel Owens with Code Compliance is here to answer any questions about current enforcement of these units and the ordinance. And Aaron Bowman, our building official, is available to answer any specific questions around safety or inspection. So with that, I'll jump right in. So as a review of our ordinance here in Missoula, the ordinance was adopted. Oh, I think we might be a slide ahead, Emily. You could back up. There you go. The ordinance was adopted in 2016, and our current ordinance requires that registrations of whole home short-term rentals. What this means is that the ordinance requires owners that do not occupy the unit to register as a short-term rental. Households that typically occupy a unit and sporadically place it on a listing site, and room-only listings are exempt from the registration requirement. It's also important to note that units that are sporadically listed are not taking inventory from the housing market, as they are occupied by the owner during most or some of the year. This is really helpful context as we look in the numbers and dig into the numbers of listed sites or listed residents versus registered residents. So as we get into those numbers, you'll see that there are currently 110 short-term rentals that are currently registered with the city. And there's a significantly larger number that are listed, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of those that are listed are not in compliance with our ordinance if they are owner occupied most of the year. And then currently our registration fee for short-term rentals is $60, and that's an annual registration that we require folks to fill out each year that they are renting. Compliance of our ordinance is complaints driven by folks in the neighborhood who call with complaints. Charmel might share a little bit more about this, but most of the complaints that they receive are around noise concerns and trash issues. Right. So kind of a top line snapshot of the numbers. Currently, there are 585 short-term rental listings, and those listings represent 445 unique rental units. The Granicus software that was used to compile this report and to do this analysis deduplicates those listings. So a lot of folks will list on multiple sites, but it's the same unit, and so their software is able to dedupe that. We found in the data that there are certain neighborhoods throughout Missoula that have higher concentrations of short-term rentals than others. And this really sort of creates an outsized feeling that there are short-term rentals on every corner because they're very heavily concentrated in the riverfront and heart of Missoula neighborhoods. And the third neighborhood there is the University District that we saw a lot of. And then we did see a growth of about 25% in the number of listings from early 2020 to today. And we'll dig into these a little bit deeper in further slides, but I will point out that currently, based on these numbers, less than 1.5% of the total housing market in Missoula some level listed as a short-term rental, whether that's long-term or whether that's multiple times throughout the year or more infrequently. So the data contained in this report was collected on April 2nd, 2022. And as you'll see, the numbers change pretty regularly throughout the year. So we've done a couple of different spot checks throughout the year to kind of track what those numbers are. And Emily pulled the numbers from Monday of this week, and there were 498 short-term rentals that had active listings per those deduplications. So given that it's extremely dynamic, it's sort of a hard number to peg down, but throughout the year, we've seen numbers as low as 300, and I think 498 is around the highest that we've seen. So that's sort of the range that we've noted of differences there. So this slide kind of shows the difference that I was talking about there between total listings and short-term rental listings and unique units. So total listings includes units that are otherwise noted in the data. So an example of this is sometimes commercial rentals will also list on sites like Airbnb. So you'll see a bed and breakfast that is commercially licensed outside of the ordinance. They will also post on these sites. So the Granicus software, and we were able to upload our city data so that they could remove those listings because those aren't really short-term rentals per the definition in the ordinance. So this 445 unique units, and again, that was from April, so it's a little bit higher today, but that's the number that you'll want to pay attention to throughout the rest of this. So Granicus method on tracking this data, they search over 60 vacation rental sites listings. They dedupe those cross listings and, like I mentioned, remove any of those commercially registered. So that's why we've seen a lot of different numbers thrown around in the community, both in news reporting and if you go to AirDND, one of the sites where folks can check, or AirDNA, one of the sites where folks can check these numbers publicly, they aren't doing that deduplication. So this is really, as far as we know and as far as we can tell from the data, the most accurate number of how many of these short-term rentals are on the market and listed on these sites. So you can see here sort of a progression of time. And what we can tell from this data, I would encourage you to look at the red line here instead of the blue. The blue, again, is that bigger number, but doesn't dedupe multiple sites listings. So the red number is the true indicator of units. And you can see that they sort of peaked in early 2020 and then dropped pretty significantly throughout the pandemic. So the number of sites that were listed on the number of units listed on sites dropped. And then you can see in this analysis from the May of 2021 to April of 2022, sort of the change over time. And we can see some dips in the winter and it picks back up in the summer months. So that's sort of a nice view of how these change over time. What we were also able to determine from the data was some different unit characteristics, and Emily's going to dig into these a little bit deeper, but what we know top line is that 61% of the short-term rentals are in single family units. 95% of the short-term rentals listed are the entire unit and only 5% are individual bedrooms. And again, referencing that ordinance, those individual bedrooms are not required to register. And then a majority of the listings are for 1 or 2 bedroom units, and the current average nightly rate for short-term rental units for the city is $150 a night. So now I want to share a little bit about what we don't know from the information, and there's quite a bit. The data collected can help provide us with some overall numbers and some view of the short-term rental market, but it doesn't dig into why people are listing their homes and whether or not changing the ordinance or doing any stricter code enforcement would actually change available units on long-term rentals. So it's, like I said, it's a complicated picture. We've heard a lot of anecdotes of folks who will rent out short-term if they travel. We know there's a lot of students who might keep their rentals through the summer, but Airbnb wouldn't necessarily return. Folks who are trying to meet their mortgage, so they might go stay with family on the weekends when there's peak usage. There's a lot of different scenarios that people put these on, and the data does not show us that breakdown. We also don't know the frequency of each short-term rental, so we can guess based on when individual units are posted and when they're not, that they are rented, but we don't know for sure whether they're not rented or rented from another site. So that's really hard data to track. And then we also don't know the occupancy status of each units, whether they are owner occupied or not. As I mentioned, we don't know if these units would revert back to long-term rentals if there were any changes in the market here. And we also don't know if they would revert back to being affordable units. I think that's something we've heard a lot in the community, is that short-term rentals are taking away affordable rental units, and the data just doesn't provide us enough information to determine that. Another piece of this puzzle, sorry, Emily, I'll share one more thing and then I'll hand it over to you. Another piece of this puzzle that we've become sort of increasingly concerned about is potential for displacement of renters. We know in our community there's a lot of complicated living situations, and we know that a lot of folks tend to sublet their rentals when they are not living in them. You know, we have, like I mentioned, students, teachers, wildland firefighters, nurses, community organizers, folks who for whatever reason regularly travel outside of Missoula and may live out of town for weeks or months at a time. If we push compliance, we are potentially outing those situations to landlords and notifying them that their tenants are in violation of their lease. And that is a place that I would encourage you all to have a conversation about whether that is the city's role or not in enforcement of these units. So with that, I will turn it over to Emily to dig a little bit deeper.
Thanks. All right, so I'm going to dig into some of the specific characteristics. So the analysis differentiated the type of short-term rental that's listed, and you can see in this chart that most listings are entire homes, as Ricky said as well. And while about 5% are partial home listings, most likely the use of like one bedroom and then a shared living space, those are not included in the ordinance compliance, but are interesting and good to know what's making up kind of how people are staying here. And I think we make the jump to believe that everyone who's staying here in a short-term rental is from out of town, but it may also be a bridge for people whose housing is changing or they're waiting for a new lease to start, and this may be a solution for them as well. So while there are listings of all sizes, including 5 bedrooms and more, 1 bedroom units are the most common listing type. And in the data note, it also mentioned that for the purpose of short-term rentals, 1 bedroom also can include studios. They broke it out here, but that's just something to know about when you look at the data sometimes. That trend is consistent in the most popular neighborhoods as well, that consistently the smaller 1 bedroom units are more popularly listed. So there's a broad curiosity about short-term rentals, and it's natural for us to speculate about the circumstances that are related to short-term rentals and create notions about who's listing units and why. Ricky talked about some of the factors and what some of the household circumstances. And one perception that we hear and have curiosity about ourselves is whether all short-term rentals that are listed are consistently booked or whether they are sporadic listings. And this is an important factor to understand, and we're going to go through some of the data in more detail. It provides us with a greater insight into the full and long-term impact of short-term rentals in our market. And we know that people choose to list units for a lot of reasons, but most often motivated by closing some kind of financial need for their household. So the majority of listings have no estimated bookings in the previous year. 141 listings rented for over 120 nights per year, and 53 units generate over $25,000 of income. The break-even point, which is really kind of that tipping point where you would do a long-term rental versus a short-term rental, is depending on the unit size, 40 to 60 nights each year. And at least 300 short-term units are exceeding that break-even point. So this table highlights the range of nights that are rented per year and by neighborhood. Most units rent for between 61 and 90 nights per year. And this could indicate that owners are listing them during specific times of the year during travel for work or leisure or other reasons, but are not listing their units year round. It could also mean that it is listed year round, but it's just not being booked consistently. And that's some of the piece of what we don't know that Ricky was highlighting. And here you can see the estimated income that owners are making each year. Most short-term rental units are making $25,000 and less per year. So the break-even point, as I mentioned, is the for profit of a long-term or short-term listing is I'm lost in my notes. One second. So Granicus provided us this long-term data, and the long-term data is from Missoula Organization of Realtors, and then their site data to analyze the difference between when someone might choose, or the profitability of doing a long-term rental in the market versus a short-term rental. And I used the 2-bedroom as an example. It takes 5.5 days per month and 65 days per year to break even with a short-term rental with a profit. And then here is where we get to explore what other jurisdictions are doing, and just kind of a comparison a little bit of what it looks like in other cities in terms of the listings that they have. So I think that this is something that is really prominent and interesting, that we hear a lot from residents and from colleagues and partners about, well, in this community, they're doing this, why aren't we doing this? And I think it's really helpful and important to remember the context of our local reality, our size, and then also the percentage of housing that it's taking in the total stock of housing in our community is less than 2%. And so it's not always relevant to look at another city and just assume adoption of their policies, because we don't have the same local context. Yeah. And then the last piece I want to share, and then we'll kick it to Montana, is just this map that Granicus provided. And this map visualizes where rentals are in the city. The different colored shapes correspond to the listing platform that's used. So there might be an icon on multiple locations. It means it's listed multiple spaces. This is not a deduplicated map. We want to just note that because of that, these are approximate locations and addresses, and really just intended to be a visual of being able to see where things are listed in the city. The presence of short-term rentals definitely can feel outsized because they're often located in more densely concentrated in a small handful of neighborhoods like we highlighted. And this, if you want to explore this more in your own neighborhoods, you can find that in the full report. So I'll pass it to Montana.
Thanks, Emily. All right, so I know we went through that pretty quickly, but just to summarize and in closing, we wanted to share a little bit more from our team's perspective on lessons learned and next steps for our work. So this process has made clear that the landscape and the market for short-term rentals in Missoula, but also nationwide, and we've seen this in other communities too, is really dynamic and it's constantly changing. You know, as Emily and Ricky mentioned, day by day, our platform has new numbers, different listings. So it is a really dynamic market. I think one of the main findings for our team has been that there's a real need to collect more nuanced and local information about those renting out residences on a short-term basis here in Missoula. But ultimately, the current data do not support the conclusion that tourist homes or short-term rentals are taking up a significant proportion of our housing stock here in Missoula at this time. That being said, we do plan to continue to closely monitor the tourist home landscape and take steps to improve compliance rates with our existing ordinance. So our first action will be to update the annual required registration form for our tourist homes in Missoula to begin collecting some of that additional localized information. We'll plan to convene a staff group to talk through what that would look like. But one thing that we'd like to do is add a brief survey to the form to better understand the individual rentals, their details, rental patterns, and ownership structures. Next, we plan to shift to more active monitoring of tourist homes by reaching out more frequently to advertised but not registered tourist homes to share information about the ordinance, registration requirements, and compliance, as well as to share that survey tool so that we can both increase registrations for rentals that would require it in compliance with the ordinance, but also share out that survey so that we can collect the improved data. And I do want to note that this recommendation is really dependent on the budget request for fiscal year 23 to enroll in a second year with the Granicus host compliance platform. And right now that is not funded. We also know from this work that our annual registration fee is really extremely low for the kind of market norm. And so we hope to bring a fee increase proposal to ensure that our annual registration fee is more in line with the standard practice for municipalities across the West. And that increased fee structure could and should eventually support more active monitoring and the software tools that we need to do that work. And finally, we plan to use the additional data and information that we receive from those above mentioned steps to inform future conversations about a potential ordinance update, and just know that any ordinance changes or updates would be routed through our comprehensive code reform process. So with that, we appreciate your time today and the opportunity to hear from council and the community on this issue, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much. I imagine that there are some frustrations with the limitations of this data set, especially around the occupancy status of who owns the renters. And I'll just pose my first question and then I'll go to the rest of council. And I was hoping, I know we're at the end of time, but can you guys stay for 10 more minutes since this is our last meeting of the day? Does that work for everyone? And then we'll bring it back to committee for further discussion. I assume we'll need it. We'll talk about it afterwards. But so my first question is what would be an appropriate tool to gather more information about what short-term rentals are and aren't in, I guess, compliance with our current ordinance? And then, yeah, I'll let you answer that and I'll have to look at who has their hand up.
I would, Emily and Ricky, you can jump in, but, you know, we talked a lot with the consultant that supported this work on that topic. And if you think about it, the data tools that we have are these proprietary softwares that cruise listing platforms and just pull all of the data and information from those listing platforms. And then whatever information we have locally that we feed into that. So Department of Revenue details and data sets, our own registration information, bed and breakfast hotel lists. So that really is the data that's available. And to get into some of those more nuanced questions about use patterns, ownership type, the consultant recommended, and what they've done in other communities is just a community-wide survey. Because it just has to be self-reported data. There's no other kind of data source or platform that they were aware of or that we've found that gets into that level of detail. So that's kind of where that recommendation for the survey form attached to our registration came from.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right, Daniel.
Thanks. Yeah, just a quick comment and then a question. So currently right now you can have an Airbnb in more places in town than a duplex. And the financial incentive to have a short-term rental is much better than having a long-term rental. So those two things combined definitely make me feel like we need to put some further regulations in with the financial incentive and the availability to build these around town and turn long-term rentals into them. But I'm curious if there's basically, I guess this is a commercial business that's able to operate in residential zoned areas. And I believe that Airbnbs, VRBOs, short-term rentals should just be zoned as hotels or beds and breakfasts, because that's really what they are rather than a residential neighborhood. So I guess my question is, does the city have an option to just zone these as commercial since rather than residential?
Who wants to take the answer? Ricky?
I was actually just going to hand it over to Ben. I think that any of those
Perfect.
changes would have to be code reform related.
Yeah, hi everybody. This is Ben Brewer with CPDI, and apologies, I'm going to leave my camera off if that's all right. We're under COVID quarantine over here, and it's not a pretty sight. To spare you. Yeah, Daniel, the question of the use designation is certainly, oh, of course, and this is when I'm being interrupted by my son. I apologize. 1 second here. Oh man, okay, loving it. Yeah, that's a tricky question with these kinds of with this industry, and similar to other kind of, I don't know, tech disruptor type businesses. Previously, we did before the ordinance that was passed in 2016. We did base our evaluation for zoning on tourist homes, as that use as a hostel, I believe, and so the reason that the ordinance was created in the first place was that it was recognized by council at that time that that was kind of an insufficient and limiting way to regulate this business, and that that effectively only permitted it in business and commercial zoning districts. And so at that time, the direction and the decision that was made by council was that it should be expanded to be, reasonably, moderately regulated and allowed for in residential zone areas as well. And so that was kind of the thinking behind making that kind of clarifying that use designation. And so, yeah, rethinking that would be, kind of a new approach to these, and would, I think, bear thinking through, and would probably be something that we would need to consider along with various other issues and aspects, for how we kind of want to address some of these challenges we're dealing with as it relates to the code reform project. And if there's anything in there that I missed from your questions, let me know.
Thanks, Ben. Could I do a quick follow-up, please?
Sure, real quick.
I was just curious, is there any other commercial businesses that we allow to operate in residential neighborhoods, or just short-term rentals?
Yeah, there are some, and I mean, there are a couple that are allowed through conditional use, such as like offices and daycares are permitted as a business under a certain size by right, and then over a certain size are conditional uses. And there are a few other commercial uses like that that are also allowed by some degree in residential districts.
Thank you, Ben. I would just add that you could look at Title 20. There are business uses in all of our residential districts that are allowed by right. And if I were to rent my house out while I go on a road trip, I would be allowed to without registering. And it would not make sense to rezone my house as commercial because I'd be living in it. All right, so we'll go to the next question, which is Jordan, or comment either.
So there's a ton here, and I look forward to a future meeting. I guess one thing that came up in the next steps is I think as a baseline, like aligning the fee so that it covers the cost of more monitoring and compliance work as a minimum. And I guess I'm wondering if we have flexibility with that fee, or like, first of all, what are the best practices? Is it like the equivalent of a certain number of nights of rental rate or something along those lines? And then also, is there a way to have a sliding fee so that if someone rents a unit, I mean, can it be a percentage of annual receipts or something like that, so that the units that are the most impactful and the most expensive maybe have a higher fee? Is that possible?
Yeah, I can take that. So the industry average is 2 to 3 nights of average stay for a community. And so ours is 150 a night. So if we were going on the, it'd be anywhere between $300 and $450. So a pretty significant increase over our current $60. And I would imagine there would be a way to do a sliding scale based on number of nights rented. But again, that's information that we would have to collect first so we can tie that to those registrations.
Okay, thanks. I'll hold all of my other stuff until this is back. Thanks.
Thanks, Jordan. The next person is Kristen, and then I think we've got about 2 more minutes, and then we'll just bring this back to committee. Yeah, so Kristen, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, just a quick comment and then a question. I would be really interested in seeing if we can means test the registration fee rather than relate it to nights rented, just based on somebody's actual annual income, and means test it that way. Just to put it out there for thought. But my next question relates to how we're measuring impact. So if there's a certain number that we found are short-term rentals versus overall availability of rentals in our town, how do we know that the amount of short-term rentals aren't actually making an impact? I'm wondering what the measures were for that. Was it something that the consultants, do they have like a way to define that these actually aren't measuring impact, or was it a certain percentage of short-term rentals versus long-term rentals? I'm just, so when we say these aren't actually affecting our rental market, what were the measures behind that?
So I would suggest, sorry to cut you off, Montana. We have a few people in the public that I think should have an opportunity to comment, at least one person. So I hope
my question answered real quick, Heidi, please.
Can we get the answers at the next meeting? Because I think we have a bunch more hands up. So
I just asked it. It would be great to have it answered. That'd be awesome.
Okay. Just want to make sure the public gets a chance. Is there a quick answer to this question?
Heidi, I can give the very, very fast answer, which is we took the highest number of short-term rental units that we got from the platform over the total number of housing stock units in the community to get to that 1.5% number in comparison to other communities. And you can see in the charts, it shows kind of per 1,000 housing units across others. So that was the primary test. And then we can talk more about what else we could do in the future next time.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. I see that Trish has her hand up. So I think you should be allowed.
All right. Can you
comment? Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Well, just first, thanks for all the work you guys did on checking into this. And I would like to get more involved just in the future. We have some Airbnb rentals in a commercial space as well as an individual house, but I just want to I like that you're going to reach out and find out more about the people who are doing Airbnb rentals. I mean, we've lived in Montana our whole life and did invest in property from the beginning, and we never had jobs that made a ton of money. And right now, like we have a building downtown, and the Airbnb rentals have allowed us to keep people with low income rent rates. I mean, we have people in the building we own that pay $350 a month rent. And that includes all their utilities, because their next step is being homeless if we raise the rents. And I just want to know, like, if that ever was taken away from us, we would have no option because we have a mortgage to pay on the building and things like that. But I just want you to know, not everybody, I mean, like we are keeping our tenants in the best interests. And it gave us an opportunity to fix up our building, do things. It's expensive now. We do all the work. Because it's really expensive to hire plumbers, electricians, things like that. So it gave us an opportunity to, make some improvements. People in our building are on, Social Security, disability. Not everybody, I'm just saying, but there's definitely a handful, and their next option is probably being homeless if we weren't able to do that and so forth. The other thing that nobody talks about here too, I just want to point out, is renting a property, like we've done it our whole lives, is not an easy job. We're talking about like managing property, things like that. We just had our house. The only reason we turned it into an Airbnb rental is it got destroyed by our last renter. And we've had this happen regularly, but the last one was a person who was a principal at one of the local schools in Missoula who just like, I could have turned her in for animal abuse, child abuse almost, because of after looking at the house afterwards. But there's no help for us very much, like there's not much we can do. Like, am I going to spend $300 an hour on attorneys to go fight someone? We had to take out the subfloor, and the dog, she had pets, we have a no pet rule. She ended up having pets in there. We had new carpet put in, destroyed all the carpet, had to take out the subfloor. Anyway, that was an extreme case, but we've rented long enough in Missoula. Like, it is difficult. Just the rental market is difficult. Like, now you face emotional support animals all the time, things like that. I just want to make sure you guys realize as we're going through this process, it's one of the reasons that we decided to do the vacation rental. Is if we have a bad renter, they're out in 2 days or 3 days. Airbnb, for instance, if something gets destroyed, we get reimbursed for it. And we don't make very many claims, but we do get reimbursed for it. Like, nobody's there to help us when we have a bad renter. And it's very difficult if someone just stops paying rent to do anything about it. It can take months. Like, we've had to have attorneys to get people out of a rental, and it costs like $4,000 to $5,000. So anyway, I would love to participate more, even individually as a group, if you guys have questions, because we've been doing this probably for 25 years, like a little bit residential and then a little bit commercial. And we have other things. I work at the university, but
we're over time already. So I really appreciate you wanting to be involved in the future. And it sounds like we are going to hopefully do community-wide outreach to folks who run short-term rentals, so we can understand all the landscape better. So I would just request that everybody on this committee or the public really send questions our way, and we will schedule a follow-up meeting, because I think there are a lot of things that that there are to discuss about this. So if you want to just I guess send them to me or directly to staff, or both of us, that would be great. And then we'll try and aggregate those questions, because I'm sure that so a lot of us have the same questions as well. So and then we'll schedule Emily or Ricky, Montana. Would you guys be available next week? Can we schedule it already for next week, or should we?
We'll touch base, Heidi, okay. And then I'll reach out.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry that we ran out of time and had to go over. So let me make sure that there's not anything else I'm supposed to cover. No, there's not. Okay. So let's check in and revisit this item. And in the meantime, we'll be adjourned. Go enjoy the sunshine. All right. Thank you.